is time for the final installment in this little series of mid-year check-in videos that we do every year. And today we are going to be talking about the 12 series I would ideally, I'm not likely to, but I would ideally like to finish before the end of 2023. So this is a follow-up to the last video that you saw on my channel where we were running through all of the series that I've completed or caught up on in 2023 so far. And this one is all of the series that I have not finished or caught up on. So anything that is a completed series I've started or I'm somewhere in the middle of, and anything that is a series that is currently ongoing but there are more books that I'm still able to read. So there are 12 series in this video, which is a 4 series increase on last year, which isn't good because the idea is to be finishing as many series as possible and starting a few less, but you know, we move. And the other thing worth noting in here is that if there is a series that you know I'm in the middle of that I haven't mentioned in this video, that is because I have not read a book from that series in 2023 so far. An example of this, I guess, would be the Kingdom of the Wicked series by Kerry Maniscalco. I'm still 1 book into that series, but I have not picked up any book in that series in 2023. So while it is an ongoing series to me, it is not going to be present in this video. We're not going to go in any order in particular in this. I'm just going to work through the stack that I have next to me and talk you through the series, what they're about and how far in I am. So the first one is one that I don't know whether I'm continuing. I didn't put it as a DNF because I haven't said like I absolutely will not continue this series. If book 2 in this series happens to cross my path, I will probably read it. I don't have an issue with reading it, but I'm also not in any great hurry to like run out and grab it. And that one is Dick Fight Island by Reboot. Ike. I still haven't found like a definitive 100% accurate pronunciation of this name, but this one is a yaoi manga series that is about a group of islands that every 4 years each contribute a guy to fight in this tournament to become the king of the islands. And as you guessed from the title, well, I say guessed from the title, I thought this would be more fighting, but the way that the tournament works, as it says in the synopsis, is whoever comes first loses. So I gave this one, I think, 4 stars. Something that surprised me about this is that it has pretty decent world building, more so than you would expect from something like this, especially given the piece of the plot. There are multiple different tribes in here. They're all known for something like in particular, and it really does go into those details. Now, something that I didn't expect from this is that the entire tournament takes place in this 1 volume. I expected it to stretch out through multiple volumes, knowing that this was part of the series. So I found like with that really detailed world building, it was just a little bit too much content for and too many characters for the actual size and like speed of this plot. I did have a really good time with this, however, because it was just so bizarre that I kept turning pages. As you can imagine, it is explicit, so watch out for that going into it. And with it being a manga, like there are pictures. But while I did really enjoy this, it was very fun in a way that I actually appreciated for once. I'm not desperate to grab the sequel, but if it just turned up on my doorstep, then I mean, like, yeah, sure, I would read it. And I don't know how long this series is going to be, but I do know that volume 2 is currently out. One that I started quite early in the year and have yet to continue, I have just gotten book 2, is the Newsflesh series by Myra Grant. So this was very much not what I expected. I'm not the biggest fan of the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire, but I definitely wanted to try some stuff that she'd written as Myra Grant. And this one was a zombie story. That's all I really knew about it, but I like really well-grounded, scientific, logical sci-fi, and I feel like that's what Myra Grant can deliver, or I did before I read this. I still kind of feel that, I think, but this one is following bloggers and it's actually set after the zombie apocalypse. So this is where civilization has tried to like stumble to its feet again, and we have a new government in place. Bloggers were very helpful during the downfall of the media during the apocalypse, because while the general media was trying to keep everyone calm and stop everyone from worrying, bloggers were delivering the actual truth and the real news. However, there is a presidential campaign currently ongoing, and it is still unorthodox to employ bloggers to provide the official media for the campaign. But we have a new up-and-coming liberal presidential candidate who employs our main characters to provide the media coverage for his campaign. So we have quite a lot of politics in here, and while I do like fantastical politics, more real world politics are not necessarily my thing, and it becomes evident quite quickly that there are conspiracies at work and potentially somebody's trying to sabotage this campaign, and our main characters, essentially being the investigative journalists they are, want to get to the bottom of it while still providing this like campaign coverage. So this very much wasn't what I thought it was. I thought that it was kind of fast-paced and compelling, and it kept me turning pages. I do feel like it focused more on like the politics and the presidential campaign than like the zombies and the science of it, which is what I went in here particularly intrigued about. So this very much was not what I expected it to be, and because of the direction it did go in, didn't love it, but I did give it 3 stars, and I was willing to give it, I am still willing to give it at least one more book to hook me. If not, there are still other Myra Grant / Sean Maguire books I want to try, like Middle Game and Into the Droning Deep. I think something that I struggled with this as well is that I didn't necessarily connect to the characters, so it was purely the intrigue that had me going through this, which works really well for me in terms of like a standalone thriller, but it's not often enough to get me invested in like an entire series, and I think that this one is like potentially about 4 to 6 books off the top of my head. Next we have one that I'm kind of almost finished with, but on the flip side of that, nowhere near finished, and that is the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. So this is an extended universe that is split down into 2 trilogies, 3 standalones, and a collection of short stories. So when I say I'm almost done, at the point of filming this, I have 60 pages left of the final book in the trilogy, but I'm only 3 books into the universe as a whole when I finish that book. So this one is the series that Catch Up Book Club are currently doing for 2023 going into 2024. It is a grimdark series that's often held up as like this is the pinnacle of grimdark fantasy, and it is a series that relies heavily on the characters and the themes more than it does on a substantial plot. Now there is a plot in here, but it is very slowly revealed piece by piece throughout at least this initial trilogy, to the point where I now kind of feel like I know the rough direction that this world as a whole is going to go in and what the main focus is going to be, but very much in the first trilogy it's all a bit hazy and you're trying to figure out what's going on. But the main characters in here are a northern barbarian who is trying to fix all of the regrets that he has from his bloodthirsty past and like try a new path. We have a very shallow nobleman who is also a fencing champion, and we have a torturer for the government who used to be a very shallow nobleman who was taken by an enemy army and tortured and has returned and become like the government's best torturer. Some of the themes that we have in here, we definitely have war. The people of the north have banded together against the country that we're mainly focused on in here, which is the Union, and as well as that there is tension in the south as well, which could potentially bubble up into something. We also have the first of the Magi in here, who is, as you can imagine, like the first magician to ever exist. He is an immortal, and he is focused on the fact that magic is dying out of the world, and something that really comes to the forefront in this series is very much tied to the immortals, things that happened like 1,000 years ago and the repercussions of that kind of in present day. So something that I really love about this series is that it is super morally grey. All of the characters are not great people. Some of them do good things, and like following them you grow to love them, but they all have something really horrific that they do either throughout the course of this series or in the past that kind of like you have to, it's really good for discussion when it comes to book clubs and we're talking about morality and the character work in that regard, and that's probably my favorite thing about this. I also really like the writing. It is slightly humorous. I'm really glad that it's humorous in a way that works for me, because I don't like fun. I don't love books that are solely like, I'm not a big comedy girly. It's just not what I read for. Like I don't read to be entertained most of the time. I read because I want my heart broken. Like I want to like have emotions pulled out of me, and so I'm glad that the humor actually works for me in this series. And it's one that it's not a favorite series of all time or anything at this point, but I've definitely enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, this is the Catch Up Book Club series, so you know it's going to be done. It's going to be done before this video even goes up, because I have a live show for it on the 23rd, which I'll link if y'all are interested. But I'm very excited now that I'm coming to the end of this and I'm seeing kind of where I'm assuming this series is going to wrap up. I'm very interested to go into the further books in this series and kind of like see where that takes it. One that I I'm kind of up to date on, but there is a book that is going to be released in this series this year. So in terms of 2023 as a whole, there will be more in this series that I can currently read. And that is the Souls Trilogy by Harley LaRue, in which I loved the first book. I really didn't like the second one, so I have very mixed hopes for book 3 when it is released. And I think it's going to be October, but I could have just possibly pulled that out of my head with no evidence to back it up. But this one it's a fantasy romance series, could be classed as paranormal romance, horror / monster romance. But in book 1, we are following a young woman called Ray who has a paranormal investigation YouTube channel. She's moved back to the town that her family are from, and she's looking for something to revive her YouTube channel. It's like a spooky town, think like Forks from Twilight or something similar. She finds a grimoire with a demon summoning ritual in it, which she thinks is a hoax, but she's really desperate to get some views and revive her channel, so she performs this ritual and actually ends up summoning a demon called Leon. Leon has recently been employed by a family in the town that have been using him to make sacrifices to the god that slumbers beneath the town, with the goal of eventually making it rise. And so Leon and Ray team up to take down this family so that Leon can regain his grimoire, because once again it's gone missing, and gain his freedom, and so that Ray can put a stop to the sacrifices, because she wants to do the right thing, and also she could be the next sacrifice on the list. So all of Harley LaRue's books, all of the ones that I've read, and I have read some of their contemporary as well, contains BDSM. They are also very good though about putting a full list of kinks and also content warnings on their Goodreads page, so you can definitely head there for a reference if that's something you're concerned about, like what's going to be included in the books. And I really liked her Soul to Take. I liked everything about it. I love the atmosphere, the setting. I love that it had a decent plot. I also really liked the romance and the smut in here. Now each book in this series follows a different couple. So book 2 is following Leon's friend Zane, I think is his name, and a girl who was a sacrifice to the god, but she managed to escape, and she is wanting to take her revenge on this family. All of the books in this series run simultaneously, so at the end of every book you get to kind of like the end of the plot, and you will see other characters flitting around, and when you read their book they kind of like fill in their part of the puzzle, which isn't my favorite way for a series to be structured, but I mean, it's fine. That's not why I didn't love book 2. The reason why I didn't love book 2 is purely because the romance was more prominent from earlier in the book. I personally prefer a slow burn, and the kinks that were included in book 2 included things like knife play, blood, and piercings, which just isn't, like, it's not on my kink list. So I wasn't as into it as I was like into this one, because it's very like, it's a very subjective reason why I didn't love book 2. That's why I'm still very much holding out hope for book 3. I gave this one 5 stars, so I could very well give book 3 5 stars depending on what we choose to focus on in that one. So yeah, hopefully I'll have this one done by the end of the year when the final book is out, and also hopefully I will love it. We then have my other big read along for 2023 and 2024, which is the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. This is a commitment, guys. If you're reading Wheel of Time, you got to be dedicated to the cause, is all I'm saying right now. This one is a very classic fantasy struggle between light and dark. With every age, like, the wheel turns. Each turn of the wheel represents an age, and with every turn of the wheel, the fight between light and dark continues, but over the ages we have been slowly tipping the scales towards the dark. In every age we also have a dragon reborn, which is an influential figure that has the ability to tip the scales either way. He essentially plays the role of a pawn between the forces of light and dark, and in this series we are following this age's dragon and also a handful of Tarvaren, who are people with the ability to alter the weave of the world, which is essentially the pattern in which events play out. This series is slow. Okay, Robert Jordan, while I feel like, from what I've heard of this series, I feel like overall he is very good at plot work. Writing wise, I don't think he's the most captivating writer based on what I've read so far, and at this point I've just started book 4, which is apparently one of the best in the series, but I'm only like 150 pages into it, so I cannot attest to that at this moment. He has like very repetitive kind of writing traits, like Nynaeve keeps tugging on her braid, the boys keep saying how they wish they were good with girls like the other boys, which was cute and funny to start off with, but in book 4 it's old and it's tired. But knowing that Brandon Sanderson rounds out this series is what very much gives me hope in the plot work, because I know that Sanderson was very heavily influenced by Wheel of Time, which was one of my driving forces to read it. And I feel like if Sanderson was the right guy to finish the series, that means that the plot work in here must be pretty intricate, because that for me is what shines in Sando's work and like what he specializes in. So I will say that by book 3 it's kind of growing on me a little bit. I complained at some point after book 2 that I was frustrated by the kind of lack of character growth, which I feel like is slowly creeping in, and I'm really happy about how the characters seem to be having like more and more agency with each book. But this one's a long haul, guys. There's no like natural break in this series like there is with like the First Law series or when I was reading The Realm of the Earthlings. This is just a, is it 15, 14, between 14 and 16 book series that's one continuous story. So yeah, I'm in it for the long haul. My personal way of reading the series is figuring out what time frame I want to read it in and breaking it down into chunks and really being dedicated about reading that many pages per day. At the minute, book 3 was a lot better, but books 1 and 2 didn't have the best endings. I didn't like how they were wrapped up. So I feel like without the accountability of the read along and also the way that I'm choosing to go about this, it would be a struggle for me to keep returning to this series and like keep picking it up. Next up, we have one that I really enjoyed. I believe I gave this one 4 stars, but I do know that I am going to struggle to give you guys a good synopsis for this, and that is it the Sons of Arawaya series by Hafsa Faisal. The first book is We Hunt the Flame. The second one is We Free the Stars, and I do think about picking up book 2 regularly. I just need a gap in my TBR without all of these like hefty book club commitments, so I can like delve back into another really good fantasy world. Okay, this is YA, and that's the reason why I've resisted picking this up for so long. I think I picked it up because it was a Patreon pick, but I've resisted this for so long because just generally I get disappointed by a lot of YA these days. This was not one that disappointed me. If you were a fan of Throne of Glass, you'll like this series. I feel it very much felt like the later books in Throne of Glass for me, so very much like an upper YA series. It is a desert fantasy, and from what I remember of the setting, it's set in a world where everything's kind of wrong because of something that happened in the past. So like cities and areas of the world that are supposed to be really hot are now covered in snow, and that is causing pretty much mass destruction because the city was built for a hot climate. So with the cold, with the wet, everything's kind of getting moldy, getting damp and falling apart. So it's like not a great position to be in, and this is the same for like the whole of the world. The center of the world has been taken over by this like mystical, impenetrable forest, and our main character is the Huntress. However, nobody knows that she is a girl, so she has to keep her identity secret. Our second perspective in here is a assassin who is the son of the Sultan. I think, is it the Sultan? Somebody sends the main character, the Huntress, on a mission to retrieve something from a magical island, and the Sultan's son, the assassin, is sent after her to kill her after she's retrieved it, because essentially she shouldn't be as good as a hunter as she is, and they want her to hunt down this artifact that's really hard to find, but they want the artifact for themselves, so they've given her fake reasons to go and get it, and then they're gonna have her killed so that the artifact ends up in the hands of the Sultan. I loved this. I really did. I thought that the world was pretty good. It wasn't super simple, which is what I do find with YA. Like I find YA that I've been reading recently, not saying this is YA as a whole, but YA that I've been reading recently to be a little bit too fast-paced and plot focused with less, I guess, detailed world building and less really good character work, which I thought that we had in here. It has a really good, in my opinion, enemies to lovers story that just reminded me of like when I was reading stuff like Throne of Glass back in the day. So I did have a very, very good time with this. It was much better than I expected it to be, and I am very excited to continue with this series when I get to it. When's that going to be? Your guess is as good as mine, but I feel like I need to read a recap before I get into the sequel to this. Next up, we have a fantasy romance series that I was very pleasantly surprised by because I feel like I've heard nothing but like mediocre things about this, and that is the first book in the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair, which is A Touch of Darkness. This one is an urban fantasy, I want to say, and we're following Persephone, who is in disguise in the mortal world of New Athens. It's kind of like an alternate history where the gods came down and remade the world as they wanted it to be, and it's kind of like modern society, but everything's just a little bit different. The gods are around, everything has new names, like the main city in here is called New Athens, and Persephone is disguised as a mortal and hoping to just blend in and be a journalist. However, her friend wants to take her to a party at Hades Club, which is super exclusive, it's invitation only. Her friends managed to score an invitation and she doesn't want to waste this opportunity, so she convinces Persephone to go with her. Persephone makes her way to the upper floor of this club and she starts to learn how to play poker because this handsome gentleman, out of the goodness of his heart, decides to teach her, to help her to learn so she can have more fun at this club, only for Persephone to find out that this guy is Hades, and even though he was teaching her, he has took her losses as real losses and now she is in his debt. So he challenges her to create life in the underworld, otherwise she will have to go to the underworld and live with him forever. However, Persephone's powers are on the fritz. She should be the goddess of spring, but she literally can't make anything grow, and this is something that she's gonna have to overcome, or she's gonna have to live with Hades in the underworld forever, which, I mean, to me, doesn't sound like the worst thing, but this isn't something that Persephone wants. So this one was a pretty quick read. It was a pretty easy read for me. I enjoyed it. I didn't look too deeply into it because I know a lot of people's like main criticisms of this is the Persephone she's not the sharpest tool in the toolbox, and she makes some dumb decisions, which I would say is definitely true, but I went into this kind of knowing that, and I didn't necessarily hold it against her, because as well, when we talk about the character of Persephone, she is incredibly naive, she's incredibly sheltered, and I feel like her decisions, when you take that into account, because that is true of Persephone across all iterations, especially when you see her like in her early stages before she ever meets Hades, it's pretty realistic, you know, so I kind of took that with a pinch of salt. Hades was a love interest that I actually liked. I thought he had a bit of charisma, was a little bit sexy, and so I enjoyed this one, and I am excited to continue at some point. Now, this series does intersect with the Hades series, the first book of which I think is A Game of Fate. Yeah, it's A Game of Fate, and you're supposed to alternate between the two, so that has been putting me off a little bit, because to continue the series I will also be starting a new one, but I do have that book on standby and I'm kind of ready to go, so at some point I will get back into this one. This one is so many genres, but at its core it's a paranormal romance. Like, it reads like a paranormal romance. I didn't love it. I feel like it had a lot of promise, the setup was great, but I didn't love it overall. And that one is The Longing of Lone Wolves by Lana Pachurzik, and this is the first book in the Fae Guardian series, which is split down into different shifter romances. So this is set in the future, but in the style of a high fantasy. It's kind of a dystopian with like an almost high fantasy setting that's actually futuristic, but is paranormal in terms of like the romance. Like, the romance reads like a paranormal romance. So we're following a girl who is from apocalyptic Las Vegas, and something has happened in this world to trigger the end of days, and this girl kind of just wakes up in this snowy tundra and trips over a sign that says like welcome to Vegas, that's buried underneath the snow, and she's captured by a group of guys with like bows and arrows in archaic kind of armor that say that they're Fae. So there is a guy who has been outcast from the Fae who can't be seen by any of them, and he actually saves our main character and then enlists her help because he wants, like, he can't talk to anybody because of the curse that has been placed on him, and he actually wants to go and speak to his son, so he makes her go with him so that he has a way to communicate with his son. I really like the premise of this. I like the idea of it being a futuristic post-apocalyptica that has reverted back to basics, because I think, if I remember correctly, the cause of it is that the earth was dying because of all of the technology, and so it's been stripped all the way back to like ye old days so that the earth can heal. Something that this book does that I don't like, and I traditionally don't like it across different books, is when we call people Fae when they're actually like werewolves. So the sections that this series is split into, you have like 3 or 4 wolf books, and then it goes into vampire books, and then I think after that it's elves, but all of them are actually Fae. And it's kind of like you want to use them being fae to make this a genre that it isn't. You want it to be fantasy when actually it's paranormal. Like, these could just be werewolves, they could just be wolf shifters, the second set could just be vampires, and the third set could just be elves. They don't all have to be fae, and to me it really serves no purpose aside from to try and confuse the genre. And you could be really pedantic and be like, this isn't paranormal because they're fae. It reads like a paranormal romance, I am afraid to say. So I felt absolutely nothing for the romance, didn't care for the romance at all, didn't think the guy was sexy, and that's what kind of killed it for me. But I do like the setup and I do like the plot of this, because as you get into it you find out that there's more ties between like the main character, her life in like the apocalyptic present day, that ties into this like fae world and the futuristic society that meets the eye, and it has a touch of sci-fi in here as well, and all of that I think is a really cool premise. But it just following the structure of paranormal romance is what kind of killed it for me. I have heard that book 1 in this series is the weakest, so I will continue and try book 3 because I do have it. But yeah, this just wasn't really it for me, unfortunately. Next up we have an indie fantasy romance series that I did really enjoy, and that is House of Beating Wings by Olivia Wildenstein. The series name is Kingdom of Crows, and this one is one I feel like you got to give it time, because it took me a little time to get into this one. It has a very messy setup with a lot of elements, but when I got past the like 30-40% mark in book 1 I really enjoyed it. I picked up book 2 pretty much straight afterwards, so I've read that one as well, and then book 3 has just been released. I've just got my hands on it, but I haven't picked it up yet. So this one is following a girl called Fallon who is half fae in a world where fae are like right at the top, they look down on everybody else. Half fae are kind of like in between, they're not treated very well, but they're not as bad as humans, and everybody hates the humans. They live in like squalor. So our main character is half fae, and her grandparents and her mother were actually part of like fae high society, but they've kind of been outcast since she was born, because to lie with a human, that ain't good for your social status. So her grandmother left her high society with her and looks after her and her mother who's sick, and her grandfather stayed in his like prestigious position, disowned the rest of his family, and he's like the general to the king. So there are some things in this world that don't necessarily make sense, like the main character is best friends with the prince because she attended this prestigious school with him. However, it just doesn't really make sense that she would, given how much like people look down upon her and how her family were like removed from this society, but we roll with it. She's best friends with the prince because she went to school with him, and he's been away for 4 years. He comes back, he wants to rekindle this thing with our main character Fallon, but she is also kind of into this guy who's like a merchant on the barges. It has like a Venetian kind of setting. Also parts of this book take from like Irish law, so we have a little bit of a just a smidge of a love triangle there. But one day there is a big fae party that Fallon isn't invited to, so instead she goes with the merchant to a party on the human island where she's approached by an oracle who tells her that she is going to be the queen of all of the realms if she finds 5 iron crows. So she takes this to mean that she's going to marry the fae prince and embarks upon this journey, even though she has no idea like what she's really doing. And we also have like sorceresses in here, a race of sorceresses. There's also like a shapeshifter race, I want to say, in here. And the more I got into this book, the more I enjoyed it, and I also really liked book 2. So I am very excited to continue on with book 3. I do kind of wish it was ending there though, and I thought it was, but I do believe that there are now going to be more books set in this world, kind of in the Way of the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle L. Jensen, where each series or like book that follows on after the main trilogy or the first trilogy is going to be following a different couple. So yeah, I had a really good time with this. Also the copies, I got this stuff at Rare, like the extras, but the paperbacks and the hardbacks have really pretty art inside them, and Olivia Wildenstein is also a sweetie, so would definitely recommend this one, and hopefully I can get to book 3 sometime soon. Next up we have one that I am struggling with a little bit, just because the romance is not, it's fantasy romance again, but the romance is not the type that I typically love, and it's also a very slow series, but that is the Blood Grace series by Viola Roth. So at this moment I am 2 books into this series. They're all very thick. Books 3 and 4 I think are split into 2 parts each, and then the next book, which I think is the last book, has potentially also just been released, and that's a thick one as well. At this point I've read 2 books. I really liked the first one, didn't love the second one as much, and I'm like 50 pages into book 3 right now. But this one is an adult, very political high fantasy romance following the bastard daughter of the king. She absolutely hates her father, does anything that she can to avoid him. However, she has maneuvered herself to be in the same place as the rest of the royal court for summer because she wants to get close to a Hesperine. Now, the Hesperines are a vampiric race of people that are absolutely despised by the humans and also other like countries across the world. However, they're actually very, very peaceful creatures. It's just the common perception of them that paints them out to be monsters. So like they don't kill people. The thought of death is abhorrent to them. So it's very different to like your typical vampire lore that we're all familiar with. The Hesperines have come to the human realms to renegotiate the terms of a peace treaty that has lapsed. So hundreds, potentially thousands of years ago, a peace treaty was put in place where the Hesperines would be able to move throughout the lands to be able to help people. And since we've had like a few new kings, since tension has been building against the Hesperines, this treaty has been allowed to lapse and they are coming to renegotiate it being put back in place. So book one mainly takes place in a series of conversations between Leo and Cassia in the nights that is leading up to the spring equinox, which is the like pinnacle of the negotiations. The writing style in here is super formal. Like it feels, I'm not super familiar with historical fiction or like historical romance or anything, but it definitely feels like a historical romance writing style to me, where it's very proper, very formal, and that always takes me a little while to get into with every book that I read in this series. It's also very slow, very dialogue heavy, very formal within the dialogue. I do personally think that it has a little bit too much dialogue in here and some things could be put into the description instead of acknowledged like properly in a conversation format. I don't really love it when books fall into realistic conversational patterns, because in terms of like reading a book, it's not necessary for it to mimic conversations so realistically, you know what I mean? And also the relationship in here is very much a non-angsty, very non-problematic, very clear-cut relationship where I foresee absolutely no drama in this relationship until the end of the series. And a lot of people really love that. I don't mind a little bit of drama. I don't mind a little bit of will they, won't they. I don't mind external forces keeping our characters apart, which there definitely are in here. All of the conflicts potentially within their relationship are going to be influenced externally by the plot, which is fine, but I just don't feel like there's any way that these two aren't going to end up together. And I know when you're reading romance, you kind of have to force belief that they're not going to end up together, because the whole point of romance is that it ends in a happily ever after. But it's not even like allowing me to believe even a little bit that there's going to be any conflict in here, which in terms of a romance, you know, because like when the plot is so heavily focused on romance, you got to give me some tension there, some conflict, you know, and this just isn't delivering. It is a very well thought out, intricate political system and world though, so I am hanging in here for the plot right now. It is my Patreon book club for pretty much all of 2023, so I'm going to be finishing this series, but I'm not as immediately obsessed with it as like some of my friends have been. Next up is one that you know I'm going to be caught up with very, very soon, because it's the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. The only reason why this is in this video is because I hadn't finished Dark Age at the halfway point of the year by the end of June, which I have now, and also Lightbringer comes out 2 days before this video goes live. I have ordered it from Goldsboro, so there's a chance I'm not going to get it like ASAP, because they do tend to be a little bit slower, but you bet as soon as it's in my hands, I'm reading it. So Red Rising is now like one of my favorite series of all time, pretty much. I don't like saying that with it not being finished, but everything, I've read 5 books and they've all been good so far. But this is a sci-fi series where the overarching plot is dystopian, but the actual book itself reads more like a martial fantasy, I would say, than anything else. We're following a main character called Darrow, who is a red in a color cast system where we have reds right at the bottom and golds right at the top. And the reds believe that they're mining for a valuable substance, which in fairness they are, called helium-3, but the reason why they think they're doing this is so that everybody can escape the dying planet Earth, the planets can be terraformed, and everyone can like move out into the universe. However, after Darrow's wife makes herself a martyr to spur Darrow into action, he comes to the surface of the planet and he realizes that the planets have been terraformed for a very long time, and his people are quite literally being kept in the dark and kept in slavery to continue producing this substance. So from that moment, Darrow joins a rebellion with the intention of infiltrating the golds and tearing them apart from the inside. I love this series. Pierce Brown does not pull his punches, and Dark Age definitely attested to that. The age do be dark in Dark Age. I'm telling you, like, it was a shock. It was like reading that one chapter in the Poppy War, but for the entire book. It was so much. But also, like, I feel like that's what I've come to expect from P.S. Brown. Like, he is going to do the thing that other authors are generally too scared to do. The level of drama in these books is what keeps me hooked, because everything is so dramatic. It's so life or death. And sometimes literally it is, but sometimes it's just like a little bromance where somebody's got betrayed and they're really upset about it. So no, we're gonna be fighting to the death. And I believe it, you know. I love that level of angst that P.S. Brown is constantly providing in this series. So after Dark Age and where we ended there, I feel like the reason why Lightbringer has taken so long to come out is because at the point in the series that I'm at, and the series has two halves. We have the first trilogy, and then there's a 10-year gap, and then we have the second 4 books. And at this point in the series where I'm at, nobody is doing well. And I feel like the reason why it's taken him so long to release Lightbringer is because where do we go from here? Like, I honestly don't know. Everyone's in such a shitty position. I truly do not know, but I'm excited to find out. So yeah, I'm currently 5 books deep in this series. The 6th one is released in just a few days, and I'm going to be reading it as soon as I can. And then the last one that we have for this video, wow, this has taken longer than I expected. But the last one is the Angel Reboot series by Brian Edward Hill. So there is a Buffy reboot series as well, and it is essentially taking the characters from the 90s early 2000s TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and bringing them into the 21st century. So the Buffy reboot kicks off in 2019. Buffy, as you probably know if you're on this channel, is a TV show about a girl who is the Vampire Slayer, which is the one person responsible for fighting back against the forces of darkness. She has to save the world a bunch of times. We also have a spin-off show called Angel, which is about the one vampire with a soul. So he's like super dark, brooding and tortured because of all of the terrible things that he did before he was cursed with a soul, and now he has to repent for all of his actions. And one way he does that is by moving to Los Angeles and setting up a detective agency called Angel Investigations, where their tagline is "We help the helpless." I don't know what was it, volume 2 that I read of this. I am progressing with this series very slowly, and that's because you have to flip-flop between Buffy and Angel to get the full story, and the art for Buffy has gone severely downhill. I do actually like Angel though. Something that I really loved about Buffy is that it very much keeps to the voices of the characters, but I feel like the reboot for Buffy is following the show not super closely, like different things are happening, but I feel like the Angel comic has taken more creative license and is doing things very, very differently and taking things in very different directions than the show does, but in a way that, as somebody who knows these characters very, very well, having rewatched all of these shows many, many times and being like a super Buffy fan, I feel like the characters are going in very believable ways based on their characters, even though these directions are very different to the ones that kind of like the show explores. So yeah, I will be continuing on with this. I like to squeeze in a comic every now and then, especially when it comes to readathon, so we will definitely be continuing at some point. It's just comics are not something I prioritize, and like I need to get through the series as quickly as possible, so it is taking me a little bit of a while. I am technically finished with the Angel comic now though, because it moves into, there's 2 comics that are called Angel and then 2 that are called Angel and Spike, or Spike and Angel, so it's like an evolution of Angel, but it's also technically potentially a different series. I don't know how it works, but I know that like the Angel comics that are just Angel are now done. So those are all of the series, all 12 series that I'm hopefully going to be finished by the end of the year. We all know that I'm not going to be done with all of these. There are a couple that I'm very hopeful about, like Red Rising, the Harley LaRue series, and also the Olivia Wildenstein one, because those are ones that I've kind of been very proactive about catching up on, and it's just like I'm waiting for releases, or have been waiting for releases. Down in the comments, please let me know, what is your #1 series that you started, you haven't finished, and you want to do? Like, what's your #1 priority series to have done by the end of the year? Thank you guys for tuning in to my mid-year content. I do hope that you have enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed my mid-year content and also this video, then please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.